Story 1. My boyfriend of 1 year left me because I have periods. Exactly what the title says. It's been a few weeks and I'm still so baffled and hurt. I don't know what to think. We had a future plan together, and we're in the process of renting a place together too. He always seemed to be grossed out by women hygiene commercials, tampons, anything that had to do with periods and women's health after all. I didn't think much of it since he had been nothing but caring and loving and found it funny sometimes. Called him childish and I'd laugh about it. He would either change the topic or just said that it wasn't that funny. We've been staying in each other's houses a lot and we've never been intimate since this one time we got all touchy. Then I stopped him when we were getting into it. He backed off and asked if everything's okay and if I'm uncomfortable. I said, no, it's just I'm on my period. Dead silence. He asked me, for how long? And I was like, what do you mean? He then backed away farther from me and sat silent, sometimes looking at his phone. I got sad and confused, so I laid down next to him, hoping for some cuddles, trying not to make it more awkward by saying something, so I was keeping silent. Nothing. Then he spoke. He said I should do something about it, and it completely ruined the mood for him. He told me he heard there's pills that make periods go away, and everyone uses them, why can't you? I told him that it's not true, and that the pills have major side effects, which I don't want to take because my periods aren't at all heavy, and I rarely get cramps. After hearing about them being heavy, he became completely disgusted. He told me he didn't want anything to do with it, and to fix my problems. I wasn't even angry. I was just hurt and shocked. It was my boyfriend. My beloved says stuff like that to me. I fell asleep crying and hurt that night. It sounded so stupid, yet so embarrassing and hurtful. After 3 days of absolutely no feelings, just a hug saying goodbye to him in the morning, he was supposed to leave. He sent a text saying he's been thinking about me. He told me he does so much for us. Why can't I fix my periods so it doesn't have to be such a problem? I told him he was making it a problem and that he should be real and not childish. He completely disagreed and called me selfish. The next morning, he dumped me over a text. It's almost as if the love wasn't there. I've been crying a lot, having panic attacks. I was so sure he was the one. This sounds so stupid, I can't believe it. So, yeah, I don't want advice. I'm over him. I just wanted to rant on how some people are completely ignorant. I'm just as flabbergasted as OP is in this case. And I'm really curious how old this couple is, how old the boy is in this situation. And he must be a boy, not a man, for him to actually have such a juvenile concept of what a period is and how it factors into a relationship. Because either he's a child or he has the mental capacity of Brick from Anchorman and thinks that periods attract bears or something. Because I've got news for him, if he wants to ever have a relationship with a woman, at least on planet Earth, then they're going to have periods. Unless he wants to date someone who's much older and is already to the stage of menopause, then he's going to have to just tough it up. And it's not anything to tough it up to anyway. It's no big deal in the first place, but he's painting it out to be such a weird problem for him. I don't know. He's got to educate himself for sure. Because the way he's talking, it's like the archaic olden days when they used to send the woman out to the cabins. I forget what they're called. They're period cabins for a week and just not deal with it. But we live in modern times, and these are such normal things that happen to half of the population on the world. It's just so blockheaded of him to think that it's her problem that she has to deal with for him. Just totally bogus. So I decided to Google it just to make sure I got it right. They're called menstruation huts. Feel free to Google that for some interesting factoids from history and various cultures. I won't get into it because there's so much that, could be misinterpreted if I misrepresent. But I just thought that was an interesting thing that I actually learned about at the Renaissance Fair when the dirty poet was making jokes. So we'll just leave it at that, and you can do your own research there. Story 2. Company saves $50 a month, but lost 6 figures for damages. First, I love working for this company. Honestly, I really do. It's a great company, great culture. This is just simply an example of bean counters looking to save $50 a month, getting things so horribly wrong at times, they cause 6 figures of lost productivity and damage reputation with paying customers. Even after it happens, there is no change in policy. I joined a new company in January of this year before working for them as a consultant. During my onboarding, I had asked the hiring manager if I would be provided with a company cell phone or be able to expense out my monthly cell phone bill. He looked into it, and HR told him this particular position is not eligible for a company cell phone as it does not require after-hours support. This answer actually made sense. I don't need to get involved in day-to-day operations support in my role. They also literally never called me once during my whole tenure as a consultant after hours. So, great, I don't want to work after hours. Up until last week, that policy was upheld, just like it had been during my time as a consultant. There was never a, "we were trying to reach you yesterday" when I logged in the next day, or any emails asking for my help after hours, so I was loving it. I want to repeat, this is not a dig towards the company. They upheld their end of the bargain this whole time. But here is the MC part of this story, malicious compliance. I have no cell phone number listed in my email signature, nor on my internal company profile. Because, hey, I don't have a company cell phone. I have a desk phone, but that's it. I talk with a lot of IT vendors in my role, and I don't need them calling my personal line. I also did not install Outlook on my personal phone or any company apps. So last week, a major update was applied to one of the platforms that fall under my purview. The actual maintenance is performed by an operations manager and their team. Things went smooth in our QA test environment. I signed off, my boss signed off, so everything was ready, set, and go. Major update goes in, someone incorrectly performed a few steps, even though that same person performed them just fine in QA. Things started going wrong. Horribly wrong. I was nowhere to be found. I wasn't responding to emails. I had no phone number listed anywhere. So they did the troubleshooting on their own. In hindsight, the fix was relatively simple, and I definitely would have been able to guide the team. The error wasn't even related to the update. They just went down a completely different path to resolve the issue, thinking the update was the root cause. It would have taken a few hours, but we would have fixed it. But in the moment, as things were going wrong, in panic and trying to recover from the incorrectly performed steps, they somehow wiped the database. Somehow. Please do not ask me how. The backup was corrupted in this process as well, and they couldn't use it to recover. Dear God. They had to go pull tape backups, which is excruciatingly slow to recover from and a week old. Monday morning, I log into my laptop, and I notice the holy hell that is going on. Oh, crap. I get on a call with the operations manager. Operations manager is level-headed, no blame is thrown. Again, as I said, great company, great culture. Asks what happened to me. I told him I have no company phone. I asked for it, and they said no. He just had to shake his head. Organizationally, he and I are at the same level. He just has a reporting structure, and I do not. My boss and I got on a call for a debrief, and he asked the same question. I gave the same answer, no company phone. He's the one that told me my position was ineligible for a company phone as I was not required for after-hours support. All told, it took the team 5 days to recover everything, rerun all the transactions that were lost from the source systems, another 1.5 days for the business teams to validate all was well and match up the numbers. My boss did ask me if I had a personal cell phone. I tell him no. I do, but it's the principle of the whole thing. As I said, I deal with a lot of external vendors now. I don't need them bothering me on my personal line. During business hours, we communicate over Teams, Zoom, WebEx, and my landline never gets used, as I'm barely in the office. He didn't question me further. So all in all, about 7 days of lost system access, productivity, operational reporting, inability to efficiently serve customers, inability to efficiently deploy frontline employees, etc., etc., etc. One of the business directors was still putting together the operational impact, but he figured it was easily 6 figures. All over $50 for a monthly cell phone bill for a bunch of corporate employees who they might need to call once in a blue moon. The funny part is, a majority of IT is eligible for a cell phone because they are required for after-hours support. I estimate maybe 60 of us across all of IT aren't eligible due to our roles. Bean counters, gotta love them. That being said, I did give my personal number to the operations manager for future emergencies. At the end of the day, I don't want my team and friends to needlessly suffer if I can help. I would be willing to take a bet that after this whole incident occurred, they have new controls in place to ensure that something like this never happens again. I mean, that's why they have the rollback policy, the change advisory board approvals, the backup tapes. They've got so much redundancy in place that's designed to prevent loss of data and therefore loss of productivity and loss of revenue in the first place, that when something like this skirts around all of those existing controls, you bet your bottom that they're going to investigate and do a whole internal audit type of investigation to then design a control to put in place that would remediate this situation in the future should it happen again. But from everything he's described, I can see that this company is probably not advanced to the point where they would have all of those really dedicated ahead of the fact. It seems like a small company. For one, I think he estimated about 6 figures of loss in about a 7-day period of downtime. Extrapolate that, it's about $5.2 million in revenue per year, which by the U.S. Census Bureau would be classified as a small business. And with that usually comes kind of lacking internal controls. And to be honest, even at very large companies, it's kind of rare to see that their controls are, neat and tidy and buttoned up and have, no room for error whatsoever. There's going to be errors, big or small. So no fault of this company. It's just kind of where they are. And it's just a funny incident for me, coming from someone who used to look at controls. Don't know if you could tell from the way that I've been talking about everything. But yeah, there's definitely going to be changes that come from this. Story 3. My foster parents treated me like doodoo, so I obliterated their reputation in our small town. My parents were both killed in a hit-and-run car accident when I was 10. My dad was only 39 and my mom 35. Neither of them had relatives who could take me in. We lived in a really small, church-going town where everyone knew one another. My dad had been the heir to a small fortune and so didn't really have to work. He didn't like the big city, so him and my mom decided to move to a small town where he could have an antique store. My mom was into collecting antiques. I would have had to go to the orphanage route when they died, but this couple from the church, who I'll call Mr. and Mrs. Banks, made this big to-do in church about how a little girl needs a loving home, and God has given us this joyous task of bringing her up in our homes and hearts. It's been a long time, and I don't remember if those were Mrs. Banks' exact words, but they were something cringeworthy like that. The Banks had their own daughter, Kitty, who was a year older than me. That should have meant we would be super good friends, but Kitty had her own thing going and practically ignored me. She was a holier-than-thou type. The Banks received a stipend from the state to take care of me, but they also received checks every month from my dad's estate, which was supposed to take care of me until I was 18. When I did turn 18, I would receive full control of my inheritance. The Banks weren't exactly cruel to me, but in private, it was clear they were just using me to build up their reputation in town. In front of other people, they'd fawn over me in a sick cotton candy fashion that made me uncomfortable. They'd also make Kitty be nice to me in public, which she resented. The banks would also put on a big show whenever social workers came to check up on me. They'd coach me before the lady would come and tell me to praise how godly and wonderful they were. After the social worker left, they'd go right back to ignoring me and spending my dad's money on crap on the internet or on trips. It was clear to me, even as a tween and teen, that the banks were only using some of my endowment, both from the state and from my trust, to take care of me. The rest they spent on themselves. As I grew older, I could see that my foster parents would pretend as though they had great business acumen, and that's why they had more money and could buy a new Volvo. Where I'm from, a new Volvo is an event, and take a trip to New York and buy fancy clothes for Kitty. When I was 17, I noticed that my foster parents were stockpiling away my trust fund money to pay for Kitty's tuition to college. Throughout this time, the banks would never outright say so, but would heavily imply that I owed them, and that once I got control of my inheritance, that I should be godly and generous, and give them some material compensation for all the work they did to raise me. I think they already got lots of material, especially since Mrs. Banks practically stole all of my mom's antiques from her store and kept them for herself, gave them to Kitty or to her other relatives. One thing my mom never kept at her store was an extremely expensive, Baroque-era fine china set, absolutely complete and worth tens of thousands of dollars. Not a replica, but the real deal. So real, Napoleon Bonaparte himself might well have eaten a steak off those plates. Probably not, but you get the point. It was my china set, of course, but Mrs. Banks thought I was an idiot and didn't know that. She would always talk about how this china will go to Kitty on her wedding day. Mrs. Banks assumed that since I always dressed like a tomboy, didn't care about all my mom's antiques, that Mrs. Banks stole or gave away, that I just didn't care about the china set. When I was a kid, my mom told me that things were things and not to obsess over them. So having the frou-frou china set for myself wasn't an issue. What was an issue was Mrs. Banks acting like it was hers to give away. Wrong, lady. So once Kitty went off to college, thanks to my biological mom and dad's money, I had to make my own plans. I'd always done well in school and had actually gotten a partial scholarship to attend school out of state. The rest I could easily pay for with my inheritance, which I would very soon have control of. Per usual, Mr. and Mrs. Banks were haranguing me. Oh, I don't know what that means, but they were doing it about how I owed them compensation, and since I was going to be rich soon, I ought to share the wealth. I figured that over the past 7 years, they probably stole or misappropriated more than $200,000 of my parents' money, to say nothing of the state money they misused. I think they more than shared the wealth. I never promised anything. I just smiled and kept a tally of every single bank statement. I got them quarterly, that my trust issued over the years. The Banks family never shared them with me, of course, but when I asked the actual bank for a rundown, they were more than happy to oblige. I also wrote down every single major purchase my foster parents clearly made over the past 7 years with money that was clearly beyond their means as a housewife and an insurance salesman. Things such as a $40,000 car for cash, a used $20,000 car for cash that they gave to Kitty, trips to Hawaii, New York, cash gifts to the church that made them look super generous at my deceased parents' expense. I kept it all in a nice 3-ring binder. I already arranged my travel to my new campus. I didn't have much stuff at the Banks' house anyway, and had zero intention of coming back, at least to their home. The Banks knew I was leaving, but didn't bother seeing me off, because they assumed I'd come back to give them their due. I waited for our church's yearly antique sale extravaganza, set to begin in 3 days. Per usual, the Banks donated all sorts of random stuff, many of it knickknacks and paddywhacks that used to belong to my mom and technically belonged to me. They weren't shy about giving away my stuff and taking credit for it. While Mr. and Mrs. Banks were on one of their shopping sprees with my parents' money and away from their house, I boxed up the china set and brought it to church. I told the rummage sale committee that Mrs. Banks wanted to donate the priceless antiques for sale. All benefits go to the church. This donation is made in the name of Mr. and Mrs. Banks. I was being fair. If Mrs. Banks was really so godly, she would be delighted that such a wonderful donation be made in her name. Sadly, I knew she'd go the other way, because she was faker than cornstar implants. The ladies were flabbergasted, especially when I told them the appraisal of the set's value. I also told them that if they needed proof of ownership and right to sell, to contact the number of a certain attorney in New York. They thanked me profusely and praised the Lord Jebus for Mrs. Banks's generosity. This would be the most expensive item in their sales history. Everyone knew no one could afford to buy the set outright, but everyone would love to buy the pieces piecemeal. Like, I got a cup and saucer, or I got one of the chargers. I got an egg cup. I got a rock. The Banks were supposed to work the sale the second day, and I wasn't there. What I did hear was that my foster mom went ballistic when she saw her china set for sale, and that it was a huge hit, and ladies from all over the county had bought pieces of it, and it raised so much money for the church. My foster mom threw a tantrum and said that I had stolen the set from her house. The ladies at the church explained that I had made the donation in her name, and she was getting credit for the donation to the church. My foster mom was practically yanking her hair out, according to what I heard later. She was trying to track down who had bought pieces and trying to get them back. Of course, she was unsuccessful. What she was successful in was looking like a grade A D-bag. The entire church thought she was selfish and materialistic and acting very ungodly, especially the way she cursed her foster daughter. A week later, my foster parents received a package by registered mail from me and my attorney. It contained my binder, where I showed my bank statements and also a list of all their spending extravagances. It also contained a warning from my attorney that should they ever try to contact me again for money, that they will receive a bill and a court date. That was that. 10 years later, I work as a third-grade teacher. I'm married to an accountant, and we have a 3-year-old son and 1-year-old daughter. Kitty ended up working through college, and as we've gotten older, we've reconnected. She apologized for the way she acted when we were kids. We're friends now and see each other multiple times a year, often just for lunch. She's an elementary school teacher too, and married to an engineer. She has a 4-year-old daughter. Both of our older kids play together when our families meet. We both have our own wedding china. She has gone to a lot of therapy due to her toxic parents, she tells me. As for her parents, they still live in their small town because they're too broke to move. Their reputation is of being that couple who drove both their children away and stole money from that poor little girl whose parents died. And they tried to steal money from Jebus when they whined about getting their Baroque china back. I hope your Volvo was worth it, a-holes. God dang, what an unfortunate foster home to be put into. I mean, clearly the parents only wanted the daughter for the money, for the inheritance. They were taking advantage of her. It's almost like those conservatorships that we've been hearing a lot about with Britney Spears and other pop stars and child celebrities that don't get to control their own money until they're of age. Such a sucky situation. Definitely the parents got what they deserved, though only in parts. I mean, the OP claims, the title of the post at least, is that they obliterated the parents' reputation. But I'm inclined to think that they did that to themselves. I think they were always crappy people, and it was just a matter of time before their true colors would shine through, and everyone in town would know who they truly are on the inside. And I think now the reputation they have reflects the awful people that they are on the inside and in private. And you can't really put a veil on that by being a godly person and hiding behind your holy virtues. I think people can see right through that stuff. So you just gotta be conscious, listen to your conscience. And I mean, Jiminy Cricket. We just need Jiminy Cricket. We don't need these religions to tell us what to do. Just listen to what you feel is right or wrong, and that'll steer you right. Because in the end, yeah, people can just see right through that fake BS, and your reputation is everything. I mean, that's your identity, that's your legacy. So you got to be true to that. And when I'm just preaching out my butthole, the biggest lesson I learned from this is that how to say haranguing and what it means, which is to lecture someone aggressively, which is what I started to do at the end there. So haranguing, not haranguing, which kind of sounds like Karangbin, which is a good band you should check out. Very chill. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.